All right, today's lesson is about 9/11, but I thought I would start with this picture of a kid blowing on a candle or blowing out all his candles for his birthday. And then, of course, afterwards, you pass out the cake to every single person at the party. And if you're thinking, I don't want that cake, well, that's because you guys have lived through COVID and we're at this heightened sense of, oh my gosh, we need to wash our hands. Everything has to be clean as possible. We don't want to, spread these germs. COVID is something that radically changed what was going on in our life. It was a defining moment in history for many of us, and our normal lives were disrupted. 9/11 was one of those big events in history that changed everyone's normal life. Now, there are things that changed radically right after 9/11 and things that continue to still be changed. Like before 9/11, you could walk up to basically any gate at the airport, help your loved one on or off a plane. You didn't have all this security, what you could take and take off a plane. It all changed after 9/11, along with some other things. So I don't know what it will be like post-COVID in 6 months or a year. What will be the new traditions? Now, 9/11 is a very complex history. And again, we'll talk about it second semester. Just note, it wasn't like one day it happened. All the events that were unfolding started in the 1980s in Afghanistan during Civil War, and the U.S. backing one side, the Russians backing another. Long story short, lots of resentment and tension, especially towards the U.S., and you had some extremists that decided to attack the United States. You had 2 planes that flew into the World Trade Centers. These are the World Trade Centers before. You had a plane into the White House and one that was going for the Pentagon that never made it there. Obviously, the World Trade Centers have not been rebuilt. Instead, in the spot, there is a memorial, which I have actually been to. This is a picture. If you go down into the museum, this is the wall that you see. Each square represents the sky that day, because the beautiful, brilliant blue is what everything you watch or read until, of course, the planes hit the towers and everything went down in smoke. This day, if anyone lived through it, you'll never forget it. Like, it's a day that everyone remembers where you're at, what you were doing, maybe much like you guys for when everything shut down for COVID. Behind this wall is very significant. This is where you have many people trying to figure out the remains of those who were not found. Many people, I think over 1,000 people, I'm going to look at my notes real quick, have yet to be found. 40% of all lost have not been recovered. Okay, so that's a lot of people that haven't been found. They're DNA testing as much as they can to try to give some people closure, and they do that behind these walls, which many people may not realize as they tour the museum. This is a portion of the museum. This is part of the World Trade Center walls. If you can see, there are rods in here. Those rods were not in there before 1993. In 1993, there was a bombing in the World Trade Center in the parking garage, and they decided after that to reinforce these walls. It was a good thing that they did, because if these walls had not stayed or stood, they would have collapsed, and this is what's between them and water, and you're going to see that lower Manhattan could have flooded. And so out of something terrible that happened in 1993, it could have actually saved many lives like 20 years later. Or I'm sorry, about 10 years later. The museum is filled with stories and artifacts. This was one artifact that I saw, and I talked to the museum curator who said it was very controversial whether to put it in or not. This is basically, I think she said 3 or 5 floors melted together. I think it was 3 floors, and it looks like an asteroid. And many of us are thinking, what is so controversial about that? Well, could there be remains of loved ones in there? And so they were really struggling with whether they should put it in or not, and decided to put it in because there was no DNA left on it. It was so hot, there was no way they could find it. What you're going to do today is read through and look through the museum and look at artifacts and explain what you saw and why do you think it was included, and also look through parts of the museum and to see what you have learned. So take some time and reflect.